After a long break, we are back with a new episode of Coffee and Tea Discussions with Marquines.
Cheers.
My name is Maria. We have been away for almost 3 months traveling post-COVID. And those travels are inspiring this particular episode because, as always, Mark takes a lot of pictures. I do too, but Mark is also going to have a show of his photographs coming up in Venetia. So today we wanted to talk about photography and the connection between photography and painting.
Yes.
Or maybe other forms of art making.
Sure.
And I want to ask you a few questions. So let's go back in time.
All right.
Tell us, when did this passion for photography start for you? And how?
And how.
Yeah.
Yes, it goes all the way back to when I was a kid. So my father, I was growing up in Indiana. My father was a professional photographer. So he had his own studio downtown, and not only portrait photography, but photojournalism. And I remember probably I was about 7 or 8 years old, Maria, and I was in the darkroom watching that magic happen when the blank piece of paper all of a sudden becomes this image under the dark red lights, and it's pure magic. Years later, I went into the darkroom at school and practiced on my own. So at an early age, I had a fascination with photography. Plus, I was surrounded by photographs because he was a photographer. So we have family albums that are this thick. So my younger brother Kent happens to be a professional photographer. So you start with that. And then in 1976, I was 2 years out of college. I had the good fortune to save some money and travel throughout Europe for over 4 months. I had a Pentax K1000, and photographers out there will know this camera. It's a workhorse of a camera. There was no digital then, 1976, obviously. And that was my first real foray into taking photography kind of seriously in terms of not just snapshots, but really thinking as a painter, because I had studied painting, looking through that lens as a painter, really thinking about the designs and the compositions, the light, the shadows, etc. And that was in 1976, so that's some time ago, almost 50 years. So yes, that was my first foray, and ever since then, particularly when I travel, the camera is right there with me as a sketchbook.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it's a form of a sketchbook. It's recording impressions, in a way, moments.
Exactly.
Right?
As a matter of fact, I stole that idea. If I could just make a quick quote here from one of my favorite photographers, Henri Cartier-Bresson, mangled that French. And he says here, for me, the camera is a sketchbook, an instrument of intuition and spontaneity. And I love that, intuition and spontaneity, which is very much true. So that's a brief history of my interest in photography as an artist.
And in that time, so since 76 till now, did your subject matter change?
Good question. As I recall, even going back to then, Maria, the human figure did not figure in, if I can have that pun, into the photography that much. Now and then, of course, I would take photographs of people, places, but even going back that far, my interest was more about spaces that human activity had occurred in, the trace of human activity. In particular, old walls and portals and doors, chairs leaned up against a wall that someone's going to sit in later that day, children's graffiti scrawled on a doorway near their place. These little more intimate moments attracted me, and still life attracted me. And when I talk about still life, I'm not talking about apples and oranges and fruit. I'm talking about, it could be those 2 chairs next to the door, or a broom in a corner that's being used. Those things absolutely fascinate me, as you know. Every time we're traveling and I see a broom, it's like, wait a minute, let me see if there's a shot. So yeah, that to me is these vignettes, these tableaus. That really fascinates me. I think it's the painter in me. Yeah.
Or the observer,
The
or
observer.
the creative spirit. That's what I would call. And speaking of painting, as you're making that connection, do you then make paintings from the photographs, like from those images that you've captured? Do you try to translate them into a different medium, which would be painting?
Yes.
Or not really?
I get asked that a lot.
I know.
I do. When I exhibit my paintings, oftentimes I'll exhibit my paintings and photographs in the same gallery or venue. And people will ask that question, are you making direct studies? And the short answer is no. And in fact, I remember once I was traveling and I sent some photographs to a good friend of mine who was a photographer and also had published a book on photography. And she said to me in this email, well, how are you going to translate those photographs into paintings? And I wrote back and said, I can't, it's impossible. But what I can do, and what I do also do, is record those moments, those shapes, those patterns, that texture, and that becomes part of my way of seeing and thinking. So in that regard, the photographs are informative, very much so, but not in a literal direct way. It's more about a warehouse or a storehouse of imagery and memory that I have that then goes out onto the canvas.
And people will comment often that your canvases, your paintings, have that feel of those layered walls, even though it's not a direct transcription of the photograph. It just reflects that fascination or interest in those layers, in the history, in the traces, the human traces on an object, being a wall or a broom or whatever else, right?
Exactly.
And that is something that is unifying the two.
Yeah, and that's a great interest of mine, is this layered history of these surfaces. Again, it could be a doorway, a window, walls, objects. And in the work that I have with the paintings, because they go through so many iterations of adding, subtracting, and so on and so forth, there is a layered history there as well.
And how is it different now? I'm curious, because you started with a camera and film. Were you developing your own photographs, or?
I was not, for the most part, although I took 2 semesters at California College of the Arts and Crafts where I was teaching. I had access to that, and that's when I began to do darkroom work, working with analog cameras, and even took a course in 19th century alternative forms of photography, which was really fascinating. You know, everything from pinhole cameras to other kinds of photogravure, etc. So I have that experience, but no, mostly I sent the film out in those days, and now of course it's digital, so it's a different story.
And what I'm asking is because of the whole process. So a different camera, a different way to work with it. You probably have to adjust every time you would before taking a picture.
Yes.
Then for some people, maybe they remember developing pictures, or you bring them to a store and then you wait a few days to get the pictures back, and then some of them work, most of them don't.
Exactly.
And now we have digital cameras. In the beginning, now it's the phones that are becoming the cameras. And did that change in technology change for you the process somehow?
That's a really good question, and I knew where you were going with that question, because at one point when I was taking the course at CCAC, I had a mid-range camera. For those of you who may not know, a mid-range camera has a much wider, larger aperture, so it gives you prints that are much more exacting in terms of sharp, and they're really beautiful prints that you can get from these cameras. The problem is that rather than having 36 shots in a film, you get 12. And it's expensive, and the processing is expensive. So I was thinking, well, boy, when I used that mid-range camera and I knew I only had about 12 shots, you better believe I took great care with each shot, knowing that I didn't have that many. And that was great, because it really did force me to be very careful about what I'm doing and what I'm seeing. Whereas with the digital camera, as you know, you just click, 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 click. However, having said that, what I still do is at the end of the day, after I've taken maybe, I don't know, 30 shots, let's say, or even 50 shots, I go home and I edit. And I get rid of many of those shots.
Mm-hmm.
And the ones I keep, I edit again. So I'm very interested in getting it just right.
And I'm thinking now of Cartier-Bresson that you just mentioned and how he was capturing these moments, especially photographing humans, right? People.
Yes, yes.
And I mean, that moment lasts less than a second.
Yes.
And now you're talking about you have 12 shots and you're really careful and you have to really take care and that takes time to just position your camera and then take the shot. So I can see that for landscapes or cityscapes, but when you're taking pictures of people, you really have to be quick.
Yes.
I mean, I'm thinking of his process now and how painful that must have been. All the rolls of film that he used, or the plates and all of that, to get those pictures that were the perfect ones.
Yes.
And yet working with technology or a medium that required time and patience. So it's kind of this. It's like a contradiction, right?
Yeah.
Moment in time, and then a long time to see it revealed and in your hands. And on the other hand, now we have the luxury of the phones and having no problem 4,000 pictures from a trip. So what, right? And then we don't even look at these pictures anymore.
Yes, and I'll take it even further. And by the way, Cartier-Bresson was known as the photographer who really could capture the decisive moment. That decisive moment. I heard a story, an urban legend perhaps, where he was talking with an individual. They were on the street corner or something. And out of the corner of his eye, he was noticing this person walking by. And he wanted the shot, so he just excused himself for a second and clicked the shot just at the right time. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to say is that I have to be careful, Maria, when I'm on location, I'm walking around taking photographs. The first thing I have to be careful about
not being hit by a car.
Is not being hit by a car or stumbling and falling and spraining my ankle.
Which he did.
A friend of mine said, just consider that a sports injury. Anyway, I have to be careful that whatever I'm going to take a photograph of, that I really look at it first. It's very easy for me and others to just kind of quick grab a shot without really looking at what we're really wanting to see. And that's not good. And as you know, it's possible to start to see the world around us, especially when we're traveling, through the lens rather than through our eyes. And that's a problem. That's a problem.
Yeah.
So, and I've caught myself doing that, like taking a shot and walking away and then realizing, wait a minute, I didn't even look at that thing. So that's a danger. And especially as a painter, an artist, I realized, well, that's not good. I have to really, if I'm going to be honest, sincere, spend time with the thing that you're looking at. I mean, take it in, drink it in.
And that reminds me also two things. Sometimes we look at a thing that is so beautiful, we want to share it with someone, we want to take a picture of it, and then often you and I will say, it just doesn't do it justice. Right. You try to take the picture and it just does not capture the moment of it. It's just not right.
Yeah. And
on the other hand, I've seen pictures, your pictures, that are way more interesting than the subject. And that's where I say, well, he has a really good eye because he knows exactly how to frame it. He sees it and he knows that on the picture it will look good, even though maybe looking at it doesn't look anything special. But once you crop that little frame and you take care of the light and the color, it's just completely different. And I do want to share this moment. The story about the stairs.
Okay.
Yes,
this is funny. She read my mind.
We were in Carmel by the sea, and Mark saw there was just like a back of a restaurant and a few steps.
There's an alleyway. Concrete,
in the back, like leading to the back door of the restaurant. And nothing there really. And Mark obviously saw something in those stairs. And he's hunched down and he's pointing his phone at it, and this young guy comes out from the back door of the restaurant to probably like have a smoke break, and he's looking at Mark and he's like, what are you doing? And I'm witnessing all of this, obviously. And Mark is like, oh, I'm taking pictures. And the guy looks at where the camera is pointed and he's like, what are you taking pictures of? And Mark is like, well, you know, just the stairs. And he's like, okay, good for you.
And I showed him the shot.
And oh, you showed him the shot
I
after.
showed him the
Yeah.
shot and goes, okay.
Yeah, so he was totally puzzled, and we get this often in our trips
Yes.
because Mark has this tendency to go into the dark, grimy corners and the shadows and behind the trash cans and the weirdest places, and I'm there standing or watching for cars or for whatever, so someone doesn't come by.
Yes.
And so there is this thrill also for you,
Yes.
very different than me, of taking that picture, which is
Mundane.
the hunt.
Absolutely the hunt. Yeah,
and you want to say something about that?
Well, it is. I do feel like a hunter when I'm out there with my camera, which is my quote weapon, if you will. And one more layer or quick story to what we just talked about. When we were recently in Belgrade, Serbia, Maria's hometown, she knows that I like to go to certain areas that are time worn, that are even a little funky, if you will. We call it the funk factor. And she showed me on a map where to go with this particular neighborhood, where it might be rich with imagery, the kind of imagery that attracts me. So I went on my own, walking there, and I got lost. And I turned to a gentleman who was standing on a corner to ask him, showed him the map, do you know where this particular neighborhood is? He spoke English, and he goes, I do. And he gave me directions, and then he said, but I have to ask you, why are you going there?
There's nothing there.
He said, there's nothing there. And I said, well, in fact, he said, it's kind of ugly. That's what he said. This neighborhood's kind of ugly. So why are you going there? And I laughed, and I explained, I'm a photographer, and part of what I enjoy doing is seeing the beauty in the ugly. I like seeing that. And he said, okay. Not bad. Very good. It's that way, and then you take a right.
Yeah, so I like that, seeing the beauty in the ugly. And that's what happens. And I think that combined with those traces of human interaction or presence in whatever area, for me at least, it makes me dream about and creating stories about what might have happened there, maybe a day ago, maybe 10 years back or 100 years back. All of these traces of human activity reflected in that one moment. And also sometimes it just popped to my mind, you know, we would witness certain things like, you know, a flock of birds taking off, or you know, a crew of pelicans landing on the water, or a butterfly. It doesn't matter. And these little things that you want to capture with the camera, and if you try to do that, you lost the moment.
Yeah,
it's gone, right? And so we will sometimes just quote from
one show per customer.
One show per customer.
One show per customer.
Yeah.
Yeah. The thing about photography, Maria, that I want to make clear to those who are listening out there.
And let's wrap it up with that.
Sure.
If you want to just have a last thought on that.
Yeah, my last real thought on this is that what I really enjoy about photography is this idea of paying attention and being really kind of aware when I'm out there searching for, as you say, hunting for photographs. My senses are just like this. You know, it's exercising a muscle in my eye that's unlike anything ever, and it's being able to see something that no one has seen before or paid attention to in a certain way, and then paying attention to it. And finally, I have heard from friends and former students and even other artists who've seen the work, and they go, you know, thank you for this. This is kind of cool. I'm starting to pay attention. I've actually had them tell me that. I'm paying attention to certain things I've never paid attention to before. And I think that's really the jewel here, the gist of it.
Well, on that, we're going to now go and actually make a video for the Nuts and Bolts series, where we're going to offer a little tip, a little technique, so to say, to artists on how to pay attention in a different way. So if you watch this whole video and you want to listen a little bit more about, well, there's an exercise or there's a challenge for you, hop onto the Nuts and Bolts playlist and take a look at that video as well. Thank you for this conversation, and hopefully we're now back on track for making more of these videos, so stay tuned.
See you.